everybody, and welcome to today's event. My name is Danna Ingleton, and I am the Executive Director of HURIDOCS. And I'm just going to be kicking it off by welcoming you to this event on protecting those on the front line. Today is, of course, International Human Rights Day. It officially marks the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But truly, this day has become about so much more. It's a day to celebrate the incredible and courageous work of civil society and human rights defenders around the world. And it's also a day of honest reflection about the challenges we face in protecting human rights and the rapidly evolving context in which we're doing it. Whether it's the atrocities we are witnessing every day in Gaza or the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, to the rise of misinformation, anti-migration rhetoric, and authoritarianism, and so much more, ensuring that civil society is energized and strong and is using cutting-edge tools in its work is as important as ever. Fittingly, the theme of Human Rights Day this year is Our Rights, Our Future Right Now. That is why I'm so excited to hear from the lineup of incredible speakers who are joining us today, who are all using documentation technologies to protect human rights defenders and advocate for human rights. So before we begin, a huge thank you to all of our partners, those on the panel today, for those in the audience, and those who couldn't join us today. Thank you for trusting HURIDOCS to work with you in your advocacy and human rights work. Thank you also to all of our donors and supporters. And of course, thank you all for joining us here today. And with that, I'll hand it over to our head of programs, Matel Sao, who will moderate the event.
Thank you very much, Danna. Happy Human Rights Day, everybody. It's really, really lovely to see you all, and I can't think of a better way of spending Human Rights Day today than with you all and to learn about the various initiatives that we've been privileged to support over the years. So thank you very much for spending your morning, your afternoon, or your evening with us today. My name is Matel. I'm the Director of Programs at HURIDOCS, and as some of you may know, the programs team at HURIDOCS is the one that interacts on an almost daily basis, sometimes on a daily basis, with our partners working on various human rights issues and initiatives globally, ranging from the protection of defenders to the protection of the environment to case and complaints management initiatives. And this year, in 2024, we've partnered with activists, community leaders, NGOs, grassroots and social movements, national human rights institutions, ombudsman's offices in various contexts around the world, in Africa, in Europe, in Central Asia, in the Pacific, across Asia, and across the Americas. We also continue to provide hosting and maintenance services, as well as technical fixes to partners that have been using UASI over the years. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by 4 of those partners to highlight the incredible work that they carry out along with their colleagues in often very, very challenging contexts. We will learn about their documentation efforts and the tech tools that HURIDOCS has supported to put in place for them in supporting their documentation efforts. Around the world, some of these partners have been carrying out human rights protection, defense, and advocacy initiatives that we are very excited to hear about today. So the flow of today basically will be that each speaker will take the floor for 10 minutes, after which I will ask a follow-up question before introducing the next speaker. After the very last intervention, we'll be hearing from 4 speakers. After the very last intervention, we will take your questions and inputs. But don't hesitate throughout the various presentations. If you have any questions or inputs or reflections, feel free to drop those in the chat or to put them in the Q&A that's that you can see here in Zoom, and we will be collecting those and we'll give you the floor once the time for Q&A is up. And once we have our Q&A section, and we have dedicated about, I think, 15 minutes for that, we will have closing remarks from each of the speakers today. So without further ado, I'll introduce our first speaker, Karla Jiménez Montoya from the Chiapas Observatory. So Karla was born in El Paso, Texas, and holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and ethnicity studies from Columbia University. She has worked with migrants, refugees, and incarcerated people, particularly women and youth. She has experience accompanying migrant and refugee women in Chiapas and Tabasco in southern border of Mexico. Before this, she worked with elementary and middle schools in Chiapas, as well as with incarcerated students in detention centers in New York. She currently works with Movilidades, Libres y Elegidas, CoLibres, a nonprofit organization in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, Mexico. This organization works to defend women's rights, migrant and refugee rights, as well as digital rights. So without further ado, please, Karla, take it away.
Hi, hi everyone. Thank you. It's great to be here. My name is Karla. Thank you, Matel. And I'm gonna present today the Chiapas Observatory. I'm gonna share about the work that we do. I'm based in San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas, which is on the Mexican southern border. And the observatory is in Chiapas on the southern border. And we're an observatory that documents assaults and attacks against journalists and human rights defenders in the state of Chiapas. And we aim to raise awareness around these assaults on human rights defenders and communities and journalists in the territory, and to highlight the risks that are involved with carrying out human rights work, as well as contributing to the construction of like a collective historical memory on the victims of human rights violations in Mexico. 16 organizations form part of this observatory. One is the organization that I work with called CoLibres, but also El Centro de Derechos Humanos Ignatua. I'm going to name them all. Most of them have names in Spanish, but I'll just go through it. So it's El Centro de Derechos Humanos Ignatua, El Centro de Derechos Humanos Fraiba, El Centro de Derechos Humanos Fray Matías, el Centro de Derechos Humanos Fray Ignacio de Barnoya, Somanotic, Enlace, Espacio de Seguridad San Cristóbal, Grupo de Trabajo Región Frontera, INDEC, Serapaz, CIPA, Surciendo, Suefor, Someishuk, and Voces Mesoamericanas. So these are 16 organizations that we all work with human rights defense of defending migrant and refugee rights, land and territory rights, the rights of indigenous peoples, and multiple other themes in Chiapas. So one of the things that kind of brings us together, I'll share a little bit about the context in the state. So there's a lot of criminalization against human rights work. The violence against journalists and human rights defenders in the state, in the country, but particularly in the state, is alarming. Those of us who work defending the rights of others, of indigenous peoples, of land and territory rights, of women's rights, and the rights of those of migrants and refugees, and of people who are internally displaced. We receive a lot of threats constantly. And in the state, one of the things that has become particularly alarming, or that has complicated the situation a lot more, is the elevated presence of armed groups and international organized crime groups. That has made it a lot more difficult to do the work that's done, has elevated a lot of the risks, since the human rights work that we do shows or demonstrates the links that these groups have to different economic and political interests that they have, and the links that they have with the state. So the aggressors that were at risk of receiving assaults and attacks by these groups, as well as by different state authorities. I'm going to try to share screen so you can see a little bit about this. The observatory will be very soon publicly launched, but I'll go ahead and share some of the work that we've done. This is also in Spanish, but I'll go ahead and speak on it as well. So here's some of the attacks and assaults that we've documented and that they're mapped. as I was sharing, most human rights defenders, we receive a lot of attacks. Some of the main attacks that we've documented are intimidation, surveillance, slander, and some verbal and physical attacks. Other attacks or assaults that we've documented is in internal displacement of human rights defenders as a result of the work that's being done, as well as forced disappearance. And these are very, very, very grave attacks and violences on human rights defenders. Assassination is the most serious form of attacks that we've documented, or some of the most serious attacks. The intimidation of those of us who defend human rights closes civic spaces and spaces where we can mobilize, and generates fear and terror among activists. And that's something that's happened a lot more recently in the state. And so one of the ways that we can honor those human rights defenders who have been assassinated is visibilizing this that happens, as well as condemning these practices. So in 2024, we've documented the assassination of 4 human rights defenders in the state, who are Ignacio Pérez López, Isidra Sosme Temich, Víctor Alfonso Culebro Morales, and El Padre Marcelo Pérez. So we think it's important to name and visibilize and condemn this state and the state violence, and the violence against defenders in general. So here in the database, we can see a little bit more about what's been documented, where we document not only the attacks, but also a little bit about who's more at risk. So gender, age, to try, and which types of what type of human rights work is done, to be able to get a wider scope of like patterns of the violence that occurs. And also the attacks on journalists, which is also something that's been happening a lot more in this state recently. One of the things that has been important, I also wanted to share a little bit about the process of constructing this or creating this observatory. So 16 organizations form part of the observatory. It's been 2 years of work. And one of the things that has been really, really, really important in the way that the work has been done, especially with the accompaniment that HURIDOCS has given us, is taking the time to show and to modify what needs to, the technology, the platforms to be able to respond to the realities and needs of the organizations and human rights defenders in the state. So first, some organizations had already worked with UASI, some of us hadn't. So first it was offering the platforms, that way each of us could have our own database, and working with us to learn more about the technology, appropriate it, and not just the technology, but the whole project and political proposal. So on the one hand, there were organizations that have a lot of experience working with these databases, but then there are also organizations that have had a lot less. And so it's been a lot of one-on-one work, which I think we've all really appreciated, and has helped us over these 2 years be able to make this project our own and to respond to the needs of and realities on the ground in the state, rather than just like offering the infrastructure that's been, I think, really helpful, so that way the project can flourish and continue on for the next few years, because it's absolutely necessary to document and visibilize and condemn the violence that has been occurring and that has increased in the past few years, and that sadly, I think we think will continue to increase. And I think I'll stop there because I think I'm almost out of time, but thank you so much again for the space today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Karla, for that intervention. And, we're able to support some of these initiatives, such as the Chiapas project that you all just heard from Karla, through thanks to the generous donation of some funders. So for the Chiapas project, for example, we have here Gerard from the Ville de Genève, and Ville de Genève, or the city of Geneva, has been supporting this particular initiative for a number of years now. And thanks to that support, we're able to partner with the various organizations that Karla mentioned to bring this observatory to life. So thank you very much, Gerard, and to your colleagues at the City of Geneva. And Karla, thank you very much for your presentation. You listed out at the very beginning 16 organizations working together to bring this observatory to life. I'm very curious about the challenges in sort of working together on such a large scale and statewide as well, to be able to work on this joint fund together, the documentation initiative here, and the role that potentially technology has played in supporting you all's collaboration to be able to put your ideas together, but also sort of share from individual databases into a common observatory that is going to be shared publicly and published in the days to come. So what has it been like, that collaboration and those efforts?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's always challenges in building amongst all of us, but I think on the one hand, when we were all invited, there had already been like shared some other shared spaces among some of us. Part of what has been important is taking the time over these 2 years to continue building and like strengthening the trust among us, since we do share a lot of very sensitive information, and deciding what will become public, what might put us at risk more. But I think ultimately there's no other option. I think the context is so violent that there's kind of like nothing to do but join forces to be able to do something against this. I don't really know how to express that, but yeah, there's always challenges in collective work, but I think ultimately it's vital. And the accompaniment by HURIDOCS has been of central importance for this.
Great. Thank you very much, Karla. Now move to Giuseppe Scirocco. Giuseppe is a human rights advisor at the World Organization Against Torture, also known as OMCT, where he coordinates a global project on the arbitrary detention of human rights defenders in partnership with local and international human rights defense protection organizations. Before joining the OMCT, he worked on business and human rights to monitor the activities of private security companies operating in complex and conflict-affected environments, and their compliance with international human rights and humanitarian law principles. Giuseppe holds an LLM in human rights law from the University of Nottingham and a master's degree of law from the University of Naples, Federico II. Please, Giuseppe.
Thank you very much, Matel, for the introduction, and thanks to HURIDOCS for the invitation to join this important webinar. I indeed work at the OMCT, the World Organization Against Torture, and here, as mentioned, I coordinate a project which is called SOS-Defenders. SOS-Defenders is an initiative that we have launched in partnership with a number of local, regional, and international HRD protection organizations. And is an initiative that focuses specifically on the arbitrary detention of human rights defenders. I think Karla already mentioned that in her presentation, we are seeing more and more decriminalization of human rights defenders and human rights defense work in many countries across the globe. It is unfortunately not a phenomenon that is limited to a specific country or to a specific region, but we are really observing this increase in criminalization and targeting and arbitrary detention of human rights defenders everywhere. We've been talking for many years about the shrinking or closed civic space. And this unfortunately means that in many countries, activities that are totally legitimate in defense of human rights are no longer legal, and this leads to detention and arbitrary detention of human rights defenders in many contexts. And just to be very precise, legally speaking, when I say arbitrary detention, I do not only refer to detention that is illegal under national law. There are many cases of activities that are totally legitimate under international law, and nonetheless they are criminalized under national legal frameworks. The initiative we are developing with partners is indeed a database that we have been developing in partnership with HURIDOCS, focusing on this issue of arbitrary detention of human rights defenders all over the world. And by the way, we will launch this database this Friday. So I just invite you all to join our webinars on Friday. And for this reason, I cannot offer a preview of the platform today. But please do join our webinars on Friday and visit SOS-Defenders.org from Friday onwards. It is a platform that collects cases of human rights defenders arbitrarily detained. For the moment, we are piloting it in about 10 countries. And the idea here is to give visibility to these cases, to inform the public about this phenomenon of arbitrary detention. Because, so just as a way of background for those of you who are not familiar with the OMCT, we are not only an international human rights NGO, we are first and foremost a network composed of more than 200 local organizations, human rights organizations. So what we have seen over the years, and especially our partners on the ground have seen, is that one of the limitations we have in our HRD protection work is that there are many cases of human rights defenders who are detained, who are harassed, who are targeted because of their work, that go completely unnoticed because there is no information about these cases. And no information means often that we are unable to act on these cases because we don't know about the people who are detained. There is a huge gap in terms of data regarding the arbitrary detention of human rights defenders. So this was initially a request that came from our partners on the ground about creating a database that was able to gather data about human rights defenders arbitrarily detained worldwide. And being the OMCT, a network-based organization, we felt we were in a good position to answer that demand. And also, we see that often our action together with other organizations can either be duplicative in the sense that we often focus our efforts on the same cases, or sometimes there are cases that, as I mentioned, go completely unnoticed and there is no action taken on these cases. They are not being mentioned anywhere in human rights reports. So the idea here is to address the lack of data issue, but also to be able to join forces with our partners on the ground, with our international partners, when we need to advocate for these cases, when we need to advocate for the liberation of these human rights defenders. Right now, the platform is being piloted in about 10 countries. We are working with local organizations, but we are also working with international partners on giving visibility to these cases. And we hope to achieve different results and objectives with this initiative. First of all, we want to be able to convey the magnitude of the phenomenon. We want to be able to measure it in numbers. We want to, of course, raise awareness of the phenomenon. There are still many people who don't know about what is going on the ground, who don't know about the increasing criminalization, who don't know about the arbitrary detention of human rights defenders. We want also the platform to serve as a tool to measure a specific SDG, which is SDG 16, the SDG on peace, justice, and strong institutions, which has a quite interesting indicator about the, among other forms of attacks, the arbitrary detention of human rights defenders and, of course, other actors. And there is there also some lack of data on how to measure this indicator, on how to be able to again convey the magnitude of the phenomenon. But ultimately, what we want to do is to really achieve the release of human rights defenders arbitrarily detained. There is in all this also another aspect, which is perhaps not secondary, which is that historically the OMCT is an anti-torture organization. We have an anti-torture mandate. And it makes sense for us to work on this specific issue of arbitrary detention because, unfortunately, that we know throughout our experience that the human rights defenders are one of the categories at greatest risk of torture when detained. This because the work that human rights defenders carry out is particularly, I would say, irritating for governments. They expose governments, they expose violations, they denounce, they gather people around issues, they lead communities. And for many governments, for many cases, the arbitrary detention is seen as not as the punishment, but as the beginning of the punishment. And what really is the punishment is the treatment in detention. So for common criminals, you have detention as a punishment, while for human rights defenders, you have the punishment in detention, which is really cruel because we are talking about people who not only conduct legitimate activities, but they often do so at the expense of their own life. They expose themselves to protect communities. And that's why we should really stand up for their protection. We should really take action to claim the liberation of human rights defenders arbitrarily detained. And perhaps I will pause here and wait for any follow-up question.
Great. Thank you very much, Giuseppe. And as you mentioned, the launch of this particular database is taking place this Friday. We have the flyer, which has in the chat, which has more information, so you can download that. And I encourage you all to attend, if you can, the launch of this database to be able to see it. And there are various languages that it's available in, and our team worked to integrate machine learning algorithms, and that's actually the direction that I wanted to pose my question to you, Giuseppe, which is, can you tell us a little bit more about the end users of the database, who you intend to share this database with, who do you think will use it, and how do you envision them using it, particularly as it's available in multiple languages, and some of the documents that are uploaded there will be automatically translated through some of the work that we were able to do in collaboration.
Sure. Thank you, Matel. I would say there is no one end user, but there are multiple end users of this platform. Of course, the platform will be public. So clearly, there will be users who are already part of the civil society or HRD protection environment. But we want to be able to go beyond the civil society, beyond the human rights world. We want to be able to speak to the public. And that's why we decided to include as a key feature of the platform a storytelling aspect. We want to be able to tell the stories of human rights defenders because it's by telling these stories that we show that these are people exactly like us. We often hear these toxic narratives about human rights defenders being extremists or being terrorists. While actually a human rights defender is not indifferent from me or from you, and we want to be really able to show their face tell their stories, let people know that these are human beings with dreams and hopes exactly like us. Of course, the platform has some features, such as statistical analysis, which could be useful for people doing research, for example, on trends, on intersectionality, on the issue of arbitrary detention in specific countries, in specific sectors, on specific types of human rights defenders. And then we want to also be able to talk to governments, for example, to inform diplomatic representatives when they need to hold diplomatic discussions with counterparts in specific countries. They can see who are the people detained in these countries, who are the human rights defenders, and then can hopefully raise individual cases in their diplomatic discussions with them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Giuseppe. Next, we have Manon. Manon is an open source analyst focused on visual investigations and interdisciplinary research methods. She has worked extensively in research and investigations, field reporting, testimony collection, and advocacy with the Border Violence Monitoring Network, and previously coordinated EU advocacy efforts for Mobile Info Team. Her work focuses on immigration detention, pushbacks, and violence at the EU border, with a particular focus on the Greek-Turkish border. She worked closely with border criminologists to collect data, develop, and further expand the Detention Landscapes platform, which she will tell us about today. Please, Manon.
Thank you so much, Matel, for the introduction. And it's really lovely to see so many people here. And of course, a huge thanks to the HURIDOCS team for inviting us today. It's also such a pleasure to see the other projects that are being presented. So the platform that we developed with the support of HURIDOCS is called Detention Landscapes, and is part of an ongoing collaborative project between Border Criminologies, Mobile Info Team, and the Border Violence Monitoring Network. It seeks to develop and maintain an interactive open access database of human rights violations inside immigration detention facilities with an initial focus on Greece. And our project started a while ago in 2022, but was publicly launched in April this year. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. So maybe first a little bit of context for the database. As I'm sure you're all aware, immigration detention centres worldwide operate in extremely restrictive spaces and are usually sites of systematic human rights abuses. Of course, this is no different in Greece. Despite detaining thousands of people each year, the Greek government produces very little information about this practice and forbids independent research within these sites. So to kind of address this lack of evidence, we aim to investigate and expose these spaces and practices by creating a platform where multiple types of data are compiled and openly accessible. So the database pools testimonies, incident reports, open source research, and visual evidence of rights violations inside these facilities. And the idea is that it operates as a research output as well as a living archive by making this available to journalists, lawyers, academics, policymakers, and the general public. The team's networks have also shared the database with legal practitioners working to get people out of detention, kind of trying to push the reach beyond the academic and research community and offer practical assistance to strengthen legal arguments. And if we go to the next slide, please. So the platform currently includes 56 detention site profiles, documenting the locations, functions, and ownership of facilities where foreign nationals are held under administrative detention. 92 testimonies from people who were previously detained in Greece, attesting to the severe lack of access to services and support and the appalling living conditions inside. The testimonies were collected according to a specific methodology and a specific set of questions, either in person or over the phone with people who were previously detained. And from these kind of testimonies, violence was reported by 70% of respondents across 21 different detention sites in Greece, including pre-removal facilities, closed camps, police stations, and also border guard stations. There are also 85 photos and videos on the platform and over 120 incidents of human rights violations inside the facilities, including, for example, denial of healthcare, suicide cases, psychological violence, and the use of electric discharge weapons on detainees. And finally, we have over 380 resources, including academic literature, reports, media articles, and also contracts, which are all kind of can be used in different research and investigations. As I mentioned before, the project is an ongoing and collaborative project, and we're really working to try and expand the database to include new sites at the moment in Turkey and the UK and in Italy. I think, of course, it's crucial to emphasize that immigration detention centers function as part of a broader system of violence on a global scale. And while there are differences in legal procedures and practices across countries, the underlying structural dynamics remain deeply interconnected. And a kind of central objective of this project is to make these connections visible through the database, which will be further reinforced as additional sites are incorporated in the future. The next slide, please. Yeah, maybe I think it's nice to kind of highlight some of the challenges that we've encountered along the way as well. It's interesting to see all of the different projects that have been presented are at different stages of having the platforms published. And it's definitely a challenging process. Of course, researching and documenting violence in detention systems is inherently complex. And that had a huge impact on the timeline and the scope of the project. And one of the most pressing kind of challenges is the restricted access to the facilities. There's often kind of strict entry regulations. It can put people at risk of criminalization, and this just really limits the possibility to conduct on-site investigations, to collect first-hand accounts from detainees, and for kind of researchers to be able to observe the conditions themselves. In addition, there's, of course, a culture of fear and secrecy that permeates the Greek Immigration Detention Center, and this really presented another significant barrier. So, for example, detainees might be super apprehensive about speaking to us due to kind of well-founded fears of deportation, of retribution, or being subjected to violence or harsher conditions. In fact, we collected many testimonies where people specifically expressed this. And also staff members within detention centers are extremely hesitant to kind of disclose information for kind of similar reasons, exposing systemic issues and also resulting in disciplinary actions. This kind of dynamic all feeds into a silencing effect, and it makes it very difficult to obtain accurate and detailed accounts of the realities faced by people in detention. And maybe kind of finally, the lack of existing frameworks and established methodologies for studying kind of within this landscape adds to the complexity. Of course, we're dealing with issues of trauma, of physical and mental health, and a huge kind of range of legal issues that really requires expertise to navigate these dynamics in both a mindful and compassionate way. And it has really required a lot of knowledge sharing and a kind of multidisciplinary approach. And to the next slide, please. Nevertheless, despite all of these challenges, the platform has really managed to compile and kind of make public extensive amounts of data. I think most importantly, we've managed to share the experiences of people who've been in detention in their own words.
I think she might have lost her connection.
Organizations, people in academia, and yes, we've been able to. Sorry,
we lost you there for a second.
Sorry,
but you're back. No worries.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm kind of just saying that, you know, we've been able to identify patterns of violence, revealing hotspots of abuse and torture by having this all compiled into one database. And we've been able to feed directly use the platform as an evidence base to feed directly into both local and international mechanisms for accountability, including by lawyers in Greece, media reporting and advocacy efforts within EU mechanisms and also with UN bodies. The platform is currently translated into Greek and is in the process of being translated into Arabic. And actually the homepage in Arabic is our 5th most viewed page. We're really hoping to kind of keep pushing this and expand the network, as well as obviously the locations, the languages used and the people reached within the project. And finally, we're working on creating some 3D models of detention sites as part of a capacity building project to really kind of build on the visual aspect of the platform. And to kind of, yeah, to see where this can take us and what other kind of actors and audiences we will attract with this. Yeah, and maybe just my kind of last point is, as I've mentioned, we've really seen this as a collaborative effort, and we're super happy to hear from people who would like to work together, who would like to share their experiences or reflect together on how we can improve this project, because there's still a lot of work that can be done. So please do feel free to reach out to myself and my colleagues through the contact page. We also have a system in place to submit testimonies and new site profiles. Thanks so much.
Thank you to you, Manon. Just a reminder that you can ask your questions in the chat already if you have any questions, or share your inputs or reflections. You don't necessarily have to wait till that particular segment of the event. And Manon referred to the Detention Landscapes platform, which we've added the link to in the chat as well. And Manon, I mean, as part of your final point there, you mentioned the visual aspects of the database. I think the Detention Landscapes platform is one that features really striking visualizations and incorporates geospatial mapping, among other things. I'm just curious if you could elaborate on the design thinking that went behind the platform and the value that you think it adds to the initiative for the end users.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, of course, it's important to highlight we're not the first people to try and bring in this visual element. There are many other great organizations doing this. And I think that it really draws in different audiences. Not everybody is able to kind of learn or to understand a specific issue through reports. They're usually quite dense. They're usually many, many, many pages long. And by bringing in this kind of visual element, I think that it just raises awareness with groups who might not have been engaged before. And it kind of makes certain elements a lot easier to share and appeals to, I guess, a different level of understanding. So we're really hoping to keep developing this and potentially with other partners as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We now have Oliver Windridge from Papuans Behind Bars initiative. Oliver is the director at TAPOL. He's an international human rights lawyer with over 15 years of experience working on a wide range of human rights and rule of law issues. He's the founder of the consultancy Rights Applied, where he works with NGOs and other clients on multi-track accountability solutions. Please, Oliver.
Well, thank you, everybody, for attending today. Thank you to HURIDOCS in particular for the invitation to come and speak. As you said, Matel, I sit on the board at the sort of mother organization, and we can talk about that a little bit in my presentation, behind Papuan Behind Bars. But just to recognize there is a huge and very talented team at Papuan Behind Bars and TAPOL that I'm representing today. With that in mind, I'm hoping I can share my screen with you and show you a few slides. Let me have a look. Can you see my my slides right now?
Yes.
Okay, and hopefully maybe even better now. Okay, so let me start off, thank you, Matel, by talking to you a little bit about the logo in the bottom corner. So TAPOL is an organization, a campaign NGO that works on human rights, peace and democracy in Indonesia. We're based in the UK, and we work to raise awareness of human rights issues in Indonesia, including the contested territory of West Papua that we're going to talk about today. We work closely with local organizations in Indonesia to advocate for the truth, justice, and encourage the international community to take action. And hopefully, as you can see from the little logo at the bottom, we are now celebrating over 50 years of work in Indonesia. And for some of you who may not be familiar with what Papuan Behind Bars, the sort of roots or the foundations of the organization, I thought it might be helpful just to spend 1 minute looking at why we do what we do. And hopefully you can see that map, and the orange part of the island of New Guinea represents West Papua. And since 1969, when there was a discredited process known as the Act of Free Choice, that western part of the island has been part of Indonesia. And what has happened, I'm not the expert, our wonderful staff is the expert, but essentially since 1969, we've seen a roller coaster of highs and lows around the issue of Papuan nationalism. Unfortunately, we are now in a situation where Papuan activists are regularly arrested and detained for peaceful actions, such as raising the Morning Star flag, which is the Papuan flag, and attending events such as demonstrations and public events associated with Papuan nationalism. The problem we've had, or the challenge we have in relation to this work and the human rights defenders who do it, is they are quite often targeted and detained under colonial era laws, including the sort of well-known within the community Article 106, which is a colonial treason law, which carries a huge imprisonment and also has resulted in many cases of ill treatment and reports of torture. So we have a situation in West Papua that needed documenting, that needed ongoing eyes on it. And I think I'm not the first one to say, I think everyone has mentioned, all of my speaking colleagues have said today, the idea of bringing eyes and bringing attention to situations that otherwise might not get the attention that they deserve. And so with that in mind, we have the Papuan Behind Bars project started. Now the project actually started in 2013. And it was initiated by West Papuan NGOs, activists and community leaders in collaboration with solidarity groups and NGOs in the wider Indonesia and as well as the international community. And we've listed, hopefully you can see at the bottom of the screen, a number of allies that TAPOL continues to work with on this project. So I think it's fair to say that TAPOL sort of sits as the mandate holder, the organizer of the Papuan Behind Bars project, but we couldn't do our work without the fantastic and very brave work of many civil society groups, activists, and human rights defenders in and around West Papua. So the aim of the Papuan Behind Bars project, very simply put, is the idea of raising awareness. And I think, again, like everyone has talked about this, and this is a really important part of our work. We've also, at the same time as raising awareness and providing a platform for people to learn more about the situation in West Papua, we're also looking to preserve and make that data available, both now and in the future. Three main aims of that on the slide: through the facilitating the support for political prisoners, for those who are detained under these laws, for campaigning for the freedom of expression, again associated with the activism and the human rights defenders in West Papua. And then finally, to build a data set for potential accountability efforts, both now and in the future, in relation to human rights violations in West Papua. So where HURIDOCS come in and where we're extremely grateful for their support and their expertise has been around our 2024 September relaunch. With the help of HURIDOCS, we've been able to really modernize and professionalize a lot of the data that we have been collecting as an organization, both ourselves and with our partners. On the right of the screen, you will see our new website, and I'll put the link at the bottom. This has been up since September, so still very new. We are we are a few months into our project, unlike some of the other who are about to launch. We've had it running for a few months now. And alongside our new website, we are putting out quarterly reviews, quarterly reports that update on the situation and the data that we are collecting. And it's been really exciting to work with HURIDOCS to put together that new website and really, like I say, bring the data to life in many different ways. So very briefly, this is hopefully be of interest to you all. We've split the data and the information up into various ways that people can access it. This is a publicly available data set. So we have the ability to look at those human rights defenders, those who are currently detained, and you will see it's fairly self-explanatory, but we have multiple different categories by which you can sift through the data and look at the various people who are currently being detained in relation to their activism in West Papua. Again, just to show that we are able to move this data, or our visitors can move this data in different ways. We can do it by date of arrest, by various different categories. And again, we've seen already since the launch, people using the data in really interesting and innovative ways, both in terms of specific individuals that people are looking for or looking to document, but also thematic work and trying to work out typologies and the ways that authorities are cracking down on particular groups, particular demographics. And this work with HURIDOCS has just been invaluable in being able to present that data in a way that allows ease of use and allows, whether you're activists, accountability mechanisms, governments, what have you, to really see the data in any way they want to see it. We have ideas of how we would like to see this data, but it's really about the users and how they would like to see it. So we've seen that be really, really, really helpful. We love a map. Who doesn't love a map? And so it's been very helpful. And I think what's very interesting is that these maps look very similar to some of the other maps that people have been talking about, albeit in different parts of the world. But it's been really, really helpful and really demonstrative for us to be able to put together these kinds of maps that show where people are currently being detained. If you look to the right of the map, you'll see West Papua itself, where the majority of numbers, I don't know if you can see my my mouse pointer, but the majority of individuals are detained in the area, but you'll also see a smattering of other detentions. And again, it's through these graphics and through being able to see it in this way that we can start to really see the issue and start to see how can we address it, and people can start to think of innovative ways of approaching the issue. So the mapping and the ability to put our data onto the map has been really, really helpful. And then just two last things that I just wanted to mention in terms of our ability to use our data in ways that maybe weren't available before or were just a lot more time consuming before. On the left of the screen, just a snapshot of our ability to very quickly look at an individual and their different types of offences for which they've been charged and which they've been detained. Again, for those of you who work in this area, you'll recognise this. From the outside, this looks like a fairly easy thing to do, right? Is to be able to put together this kind of data. But we know that doing this kind of work often is extremely time consuming. The level of cross-referencing that's required across multiple different sources is high, and it just takes a lot of time. So with the HURIDOCS platforms, we've been able to really shrink down the amount of time we need to work on that. And we've been able to get very accurate snapshots of individuals and the multiple different charges, the multiple different cases that they're facing in one place. And this information is invaluable to us as an organization in terms of our advocacy work, but it's also invaluable to our partners on the ground who may be able to use this information And similarly to the international community, when we're going and speaking to people, we can very quickly demonstrate and show the level of action that is being taken against human rights defenders in West Papua. And then on the right, again, using the mapping facilities that we now have, we're able to monitor the movement of individuals from different areas of Indonesia. Again, something that is harder to do and not quite as sort of impactful, I would say, just written down on paper, but being able to demonstrate how we have monitored and recorded the movement and we would argue intentional movement of human rights defenders off of or into different areas has been really important. And again, I think without at the risk of repeating what other people have said, these kinds of graphics and these kinds of tools demonstrate much better than we can in words often the intentional use of detention and transfer for individuals. Very briefly, I just wanted to touch on how we get our information and where it comes from. So we are a small team. We are working very closely with a number of activists, journalists, lawyers, both in West Papua and in the wider region. And so we are able to collect that information from a number of different areas, and from those different sources, we're able to put it into our database with the help of our fantastic editor and our team. And the last point on that slide, as well as sources such as news and human rights defenders, also the court system, which is an invaluable resource for documenting the appearance or lack of appearance of human rights defenders in West Papua in relation to various offences or charges that they're facing. So we have a multiple sources for our work, and that can all be fed in and then obviously put into the platform itself in that sort of harmonized way, which has been really, really helpful for us. And I think one of the things talking to the team is it has also allowed us to see the gaps in our work and allow us to see where we aren't recording information or where there are particular offences which have a lack of information or particular patterns. So as much as it demonstrates and allows us to show a lot of data, it's been really invaluable to us as an organisation, as a small team, to be able to say where we need to be looking or where we need to be asking questions for further information or further data. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm not sure exactly, hopefully I didn't take too long, but I would invite you all on this call to go onto the Papuan Behind Bars website. We are up, we are running. Like I say, we're a couple of months, 3 months in to the project. So we would love people's feedback. Anybody who spots glitches, gaps, problems, we like to solve those. So please let us know. And then the last thing I'll say before I stop sharing is TAPOL, the organisation that houses the PBB, Papuan Behind Bars project, actually has a new report out today, which you can find on the TAPOL website on freedom of expression and freedom of assembly in West Papua. So we can sort of see, even within our own ecosystem, how the data that we've collected here comes back into the TAPOL organisation, and we can write about it and report on it. So just one way, a very sort of clear way of how we're actually working within the organisation and with our partners on the ground. With that, I think I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand back to you, Matel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Thank you. That was great. The link to the website is also in the chat for anybody who's interested. Thank you very much, Oliver. I'm very curious for HURIDOCS, I think, and for some of our colleagues from the tech team specifically. I think, in your intervention, you mentioned a number of features and functionalities that the database has that have been very helpful and supportive in sort of your workflow. And I'm curious whether or not there are any others that you've heard either from colleagues on the ground or even from your perspective that could be included in the database to further enhance it, or sort of how do you see it growing even further, with as more data comes in, or as we just go through time and might have it sort of shift into different formats.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's one that I think we are sort of starting to grapple with. I mean, for those like Giuseppe and others, well, I'm sure yours is perfect, but once you launch, you then have that sort of honeymoon period of it sort of like being, and then you start to sort of say, well, what are those like spaces? Where can we actually, how can we improve? And I think we're probably, I don't want to speak too much on behalf of the team, but we're probably in that sort of self-analytical phase now of saying we've done it, we've put it out there, what's next for it. I think one of the things that we're really interested in is looking to always look to improve the usefulness of it for those on the ground or ground adjacent. So the amount of data, it's going to sound strange sort of on a webinar for data, but the amount of data is incredibly helpful. But how can we best facilitate that data to be best understood by those on the ground? Because I think often different stakeholders want different levels. So on a very basic level, I think we're looking at how can this data be best accessed by those on the ground. That can mean stuff through like the amount of sort of data that is actually on there. Is there ways that we could actually make it simpler? So those who don't have great internet connections, those who don't have broadband could actually access this information in a much easier way. And the use of symbols and graphics that we could actually try and implement into the system that would allow those people who, I mean, it's both in Indonesian and in English, but who could then access it in that way. So it's funny, like, maybe I shouldn't say this on this call, but you start off by putting so much information in, and then you almost start having that process of how do we kind of, if not withdraw the data, but then how do we represent that data in a way that will be most impactful. So I think that's where we're at as an organization. I would say you can only really do that probably through trial and error. So it's not something that we can sort of do without first putting it out there. But we're always trying to think, how can this best serve the community that we're working with? And so those simplification and the way that we can actually use it in that way is really important for us, and something that we're continuing to improve moving forward. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you to all four of you, Oliver, Giuseppe, Karla, and Manon. Really, thank you very much. Now the floor is open for anybody who would like to ask a question or just share your reflections or inputs, suggestions. You can use the Q&A or just type in the chat, and my colleagues will help collect those for me, and I'm happy to share them with the panelists here. And maybe Danna, you can kick us off with one question, and then we'll take the rest. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of the panelists and for your excellent presentations. And Oliver, I really wanted to pick up on that last point that you were making. I mean, the whole point of collecting data is so that it can be used for the advocacy or for the legal cases. So understanding how to collect it and then use it, or as you said, extract it from the database is really key. And for the right audiences. And actually, my question is about that side, like the use of the data that you're all collecting. And so my question is to all of the panelists around if you're ever, or if your experiences of being challenged on the authenticity of the data that you're collecting and therefore using, and how collecting it in databases like Uwazi can help you push back against that particular form of repression that we're seeing often as civil society space is shrinking and shrinking. So really a question for any of the panelists, if anybody would like to jump in.
I can jump in, but I don't want to take the space of anyone. I can't see very much on my screen, so please, if I was interrupting someone, do tell me. Yeah, I think this is a very good point, and I think it's something that we've also been talking about a little bit recently as well. Is like if we get any, if we kind of get any pushback, how will we be able to kind of be solid in our response and be kind of certain of what we're gathering? What we actually had started to talk about is like really implementing some sort of kind of review system for anything that does go onto the database. It's very easy for us to look back and think, oh no, there's like a kind of mistake here. It's easy to do. And especially if we're going to try and start including like other organizations and new partners, we want to really maintain that kind of that research rigor. So we are kind of in that process of putting in some sort of review system that kind of really verifies where information can be verified, verifying it, and if not, kind of cross-checking it, corroborating it, speaking with people on the ground who are engaged in that specific context to kind of, to keep that standard up. But then after that, once you've got that kind of transparent methodology of how you're uploading that data and you're sourcing and referencing everything that you have, that you share, I think it's a lot harder to pick holes in, and you know, people will always kind of pick holes in testimonies. This is a classic line. And you know, we've worked quite a lot with testimonies. We'll always say, okay, maybe you can pick a hole with one testimony, but when you have like 50 testimonies all from the same kind of location at different times from different people, it's a lot more difficult to kind of refute those claims. So having everything in the database, like kind of compiled and being able to show like the consistency of the types of information that are being shared is super useful.
Thank you, Manon. Is anybody going to jump in? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit. It's great hearing about the other projects, because this has been like something that we've been very worried about, and that has been like talked about a lot within the Chiapas Observatory, since there has been a lot of slander by the national government against organizations in Mexico, saying that the information that we share in general, like other organizations as well, are lies and stuff like that. And I think it's something that, well, right now we're set up in like commissions, so there is one commission that will like verify and cross-check information. But I think what kind of we've talked about is just putting it out there, and then I think we'll go ahead and see what happens and how to implement it. But hearing about these other experiences, I think will really help us kind of tighten that up as well.
I think I would just echo that and say, you know, there is a recognition, and I think we shouldn't be afraid of acknowledging it, that, you know, that these platforms are only as good as the data that we input into them. You know, the source data is where we sort of live and die by it. I can say that, you know, to your point, Karla, and to yours, Manon, like the PBB website, we have a transparent process that is on the website, so people can read that. It's quite long. We don't make apologies for that. It's detailed, and so we wanted to be very clear about how we do that. And you know, we abide by many of the sort of like standard practices that many people, you know, that are out there. But I think you're right, Manon, that like ultimately the data itself is valid and truthful and accurate, but we still need to be aware that there will be people who will still dispute it, because it sits in a space, I think, to your point, Giuseppe, where it's of inconvenient at best, and at worst of a clear violation of international law. So making sure that data is rigorously examined, ideally by multiple sources, and then putting it out there with that sort of like, you know, being aware that it's likely to be knocked down anyway, is just a reality of, you know, the data collection and the process for sure.
Great, thank you very much. We have a question from the audience that actually ties a little bit with that, but it's really focused on the sensitivity of the data that you all collect, and trying to understand what are the methodological considerations that you made when building your respective public databases, And in relation to that, you might have some data that's private that you're not looking to share, that cannot be shared publicly. So how do you sort of make the decision on what to share publicly versus not public, or to keep private, and the sensitivity behind the data that you're collecting? So what are the methodological processes that you put in place to make sure that you're sort of taking into account the sensitivity of that data?
Yes, maybe I can answer that because that was quite a key question for the development of our own platform. So indeed, SOS-Defenders has, and I apologize if I'm being technically incorrect here with colleagues, but has two, let's say, interfaces, a public and a private one. And there are cases that we may want to collect. Actually, there are already cases that we have collected and that we will not share publicly. And the main consideration there is really the safety of the defender. So to be able to upload cases on SOS-Defenders, the partners that are part in this project need to have consent from the defender. And they can have either the consent to record, store, and publish the information, or just the consent to record and store the information but not publish it. So the consideration, the main consideration is the safety of the defender and whether the sharing of information may actually harm the defender, may put the defenders at risk. This is very clear in our methodology, and this is something that we have agreed with all partners and has been the main point guiding the entire data collection process. Thanks.
Did anybody else want to jump in? Question?
I can also maybe touch on this a bit. This is a huge thing for us. Yeah, like of course we were speaking with people who were either still in detention or who were still in the country, and we know what kind of implications that might have for them, and kind of being able to, you know, we would never ever push anyone to speak to us. We would never kind of offer any kind of any sense of that we can protect them. It's super important when we were collecting information that we were super transparent about this. Of course, all of our data is anonymized. All photos, kind of the faces and videos, like faces are blurred. There's no personal data, but we were also conscious that by describing some incidents within a certain time frame, it might still reveal the identities of people. So in some cases, we also only uploaded testimonies once we knew that that person had left the country or had left the detention center or after a certain period of time. Yeah, it was a kind of real conversation where we suddenly questioned, are we going to be putting people at risk? And had to really navigate these kind of methods around it.
I think just one thing to add, I would echo everything that's been said there, and it's very, very familiar. I guess the only thing to add, and hopefully this is sort of on point, but particularly for the West Papuan situation, and I think it's probably the same with a lot of the people, the victims that in other projects as well, is the recognition. How do I put this? Like the recognition that many of these people have, particularly for a historical situation like PB, the West Papuan, many people have told their story several times. You know, it's different. Like some victims, it's like that. You know, so this is their first time. But for a lot of the organizations we work with and whose voices we seek to amplify, you know, they are often telling these stories, they feel like multiple times. They've told this already, like, why are we, you know, we're doing it again to a different group, but it's, you know, it's the same stories, right? And just sort of recognizing that part of the work is also important, both in terms of, you know, like triggering and sort of asking people to sort of relive often historical trauma, but also just recognizing that we want to be doing this in a way which is obviously respectful and complies with all the points that have been made already, but within that sort of historical context, I think is really important for our work. And just trying to recognize that these stories are or these accounts, I should say, have often been told on multiple occasions. And so trying to find that sort of route to truth and accountability is a really important part of the sort of sensitivities around the work that we're trying to do.
Thanks for sharing.
I mean, I would
Yes.
echo just
ahead.
everything that's been said. It's been a central conversation, what's made public and private, and centering the safety of the human rights defenders. Going category, like each category, and deciding like what will be public, what won't, and trying to take a lot of care in having not putting information out there that will identify the cases. I think what I would add is one thing that has also been important is kind of the trust in when HURIDOCS and the use of open tech, of open source tech, and that the servers are also in safe spaces, just like the technology aspect, I think has also been something that has been important in thinking about the safety of the human rights defenders and where the data that we're documenting is stored, I think is also kind of something that has helped kind of build this trust and has helped us center the safety of the human rights defenders.
Yeah, great. That makes sense. Thank you for that feedback for our team as well. We have another question here from Marie. How do you identify or gain access to individuals who are detained? What is the process for collecting their testimonies? Are there instances where testimonies are not collected due to perhaps a lack of translators? Are these testimonies gathered on the spot or at later dates when the individuals have reached maybe a safer location or are better able to share their testimonies? Anybody can jump in.
I'm happy to to share again on my experience. There was quite a lot of questions there. I don't know if I'm gonna remember all of them. I started noting them down, but yeah, you're totally valid questions. And if this is also something that you like are working on longer term, I'm also happy to have a conversation outside of the space of the webinar. But yes, so I think the most important thing is that we're working like within the context of like of the country. We're not working inside of detention centers, and Mobile Info Team, they're an organization based in northern Greece, and they offer information and kind of casework support through hotline services, and they've built up a huge kind of page on Facebook on kind of like asylum information, and a huge following within the kind of migrant community, both in Greece and beyond. And this has been absolutely central to be able to reach people in detention. It was one of the kind of key issues, was reaching people, and it kind of meant that we could put posts, or you can yeah kind of advertise that you're looking for some information, and people were super responsive. The Border Violence Monitoring Network also has kind of built this network, both kind of in Greece, but also across several countries. And it's a similar thing. It takes a lot of time. It's building up a kind of a trust in people. And then, yeah, we always work with translators, and translators who have been trained specifically in this type of testimony collection, which involves a lot of mediation and kind of understanding of the kind of trauma sensitivity that people are experiencing. We never interview people in detention centers at the time. It would not be possible within the context. It's way too risky and would be risky for people. So it's usually over the phone. I'm conscious that not everybody has access to phones in detention centers. It's one of the things that has been possible sometimes. And of course, afterwards, once people have left, they've left Greece, they've left detention, they also reach out and want to share their story and kind of push and be involved in this real kind of push for for advocacy and accountability.
I'm not sure I've got much more to add, but for the purposes of I think you're right, and I think what Manon's point is very interesting, is around sort of our work is part of ongoing sort of networks and collaborations. So I think there's that sort of sense of like, you know, we always want to avoid that thing of like, we just want to come and collect the data, right? I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's just so sort of like, you know, it's obviously very insensitive, and it's not very constructive to be like, we're here to sort of build a, we're here to build a data platform. You know, it's just, it sounds, I'm not trying to sound facetious, but it's that this is one tool in the toolbox, pardon the cliche, of the work that we do. And so we're working with communities and we're working with groups, particularly in West Papua, who are historically subject to you know, ongoing issues by the authorities. And so the sort of way that we collect the data for this part is, like I say, is part of a much wider project that we're working on, which is around the advocacy and highlighting the issues of West Papua. So it's within that context, hopefully that sort of slightly answers the questions or adds something, is that we are obviously looking to use the best practices, international standards in terms of data collection, but also always done within the sensitivity of it's not being just a data collection project, but actually a much wider movement, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, great. Thank you very much. We're nearing the end of the event, and I'll invite maybe all of the panelists to just share one final thought, maybe your closing remarks, and I'll offer this as a guiding maybe question. What is one piece of advice that you would offer based on your experience in developing these platforms to fellow human rights defenders that are considering the use of such technologies in their documentation and advocacy work?
Maybe I start. I mean, on our side, one key consideration has been how to ensure local leadership in all these. We are an international human rights NGO, and we are trying to collect and gather data on human rights defenders arbitrarily detained around the world. We have to recognize that these data has to necessarily come from local partners, from organizations working on the ground. So clearly, these initiatives are sustainable only if you ensure the sustainability of the data collection on the ground and the sustainability of the organizations that conduct that data collection. So it's not only about, you know, recognizing the contribution of local partners, but it's also ensuring that these initiatives are locally led. And that's why I really wanted to clarify that, yes, we are sort of convening this initiative, but in the group we wanted and we have ensured a majority of local organizations, which is the group that takes the decisions about the initiative, and also consider how you have to support these organizations in conducting that monitoring and documentation. So just not expecting local partners to give you something, but think also about what you can provide to partners in exchange and where each of us can contribute. Thank you.
I can go next. I think I mean Giuseppe's points are so well made, and that the sort of supporting and the ongoing work of those who are on the ground or ground adjacent is really sort of key to our work. I think the only other piece of advice, and I feel, you know, really should be our staff who's talking about this, but I think to the point that we were making earlier on, just to sort of reiterate that for anybody who's considering doing this, is this platform is flexible and is, you know, you can always improve it. So I would always sort of, you know, suggest to people is obviously you want to get it as good as possible when you launch it, but it's not the end of the story. So my advice would be to, you know, collect the data, do everything you can to get your site up and running, but don't let that stop you from kind of getting the site up and running in the first place, because you could spend forever just kind of trying to get it perfect. And I think probably there's others on the call who are about to experience it. Once it's launched, you will then have, obviously it doesn't end there. So it's an ongoing process. And so you can go into it thinking that you're going to try your absolute best to put the best product you are, but then, you know, with HURIDOCS' help, and it's been fantastic for guidance and for training and for reflection in particular, to use those tools that are available to reflect on the work and then try and improve it again, and, you know, go again. And that's hard, right? Because many of you will be exhausted from having spent ages putting the platform together. The idea of having to go again probably just feels like terrifying right now. But that would be a key piece of advice, would be to use those launches and those reflections as an opportunity to improve moving forward. Thank you.
I think I can go. I think one thing that has been really important for us is working collectively. We're all local on the ground organizations, and kind of joining forces, I think, has been really important. I mean, in general, for the context, but particularly for this project, so that way the data collection doesn't seem that huge. We all bring our data. It's all part of the work that we do, but I think kind of joining forces and working collectively has been super important, and something I would share as like a good practice.
I completely echo everything that's been said. I think maybe the thing that I learned along the way is that this is really it's a long-term kind of effort. You're kind of engaging in archival work, and it's extremely time-consuming. It's not a kind of dip in, dip out project. And I think it's so important to do this like collectively, to see that it's about a kind of sustainable effort, to engage with people locally, to not be in this kind of like extractive, kind of, as Oliver was saying as well, it's not an extractive effort. It's about building relationships and collaborations. And also, I mean, of course, everybody has worked on a slightly different topic, but for us, it's so essential to be working with people who have lived experience of the topic that you're looking at, and who can really share their their kind of knowledge and experience and feed that into the process. So yeah, a kind of reflection of everything that's already been said, but yeah.
Thank you very, very, very much. We've come to the end of this event. Thank you all so much, right on time. I really want to thank especially the panelists for keeping your interventions within the allocated time. That's been very helpful, just in sort of keeping with the flow and the agenda of the event. So thank you very much for that. And for sharing your work with us, most importantly, whether it's the challenges as well as the successes. But I think overall, all of you have mentioned the importance of collaboration, whether it's with the partners that are working locally within, you know, on the ground to sort of collect this information, or with your colleagues that are working on these databases, or whether it's with our team at HURIDOCS to provide the support more on the sort of best practices, methods, needs assessment, and providing the tech tools. So thank you very, very much for your interventions. Thank you to all of the participants for your questions, and thank you to the HURIDOCS team actually for the work that you've done, that all of us have done in sort of bringing these databases to life. And I think we can be proud of the work that we've done this year to support our various initiatives and partners around the world. And ahead of the upcoming holidays, I wish you all a very restful time, a well-deserved rest if you can squeeze that in. It's not always easy, but it's also important for us to take care of ourselves and to start the new year very rejuvenated and ready to continue to take on the work and support civil society initiatives around the globe in our various contexts, and in solidarity with you all always. Thank you very much.